Madame Soura pour vous détailler le rapport qui a été rédigé par la Fédération arabe des droits de l'homme en ce qui concerne la Coupe du Monde qui a été attribuée au Qatar pour 2022. Merci Soura.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Sura Salam and I speak here before you today as a representative of the Arab Federation for Human Rights, an organization based out of Geneva in 2016. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank the Geneva Press Club for giving us the opportunity to speak here today. We're thankful. The Arab Federation for Human Rights produced a largely report released in September of this year. I believe all of you should have received a copy, entitled World Cup or World Shame. This demonstrates Qatar's responsibility and participation in a range of shameful acts. In today's presentation, I will be highlighting Qatar's participation and responsibility in relation to claims of corruption, in the role of terrorist financing, and the significant violations of labor rights. The Ghafran family is with us today and will have the opportunity to speak afterwards about how Qatar has denied them their right to nationality, which will serve as an example that highlights the types of violations Qatar is committing. Such behavior raises serious questions about Qatar being a suitable host for the World Cup. The World Cup is a significant global event, one that we will all engage with in one way or another. The report being launched today demonstrates that the 2002 tournament must be seen as a world shame and a celebration of the global game of football. The impact of the World Cup is well known. Over 3.2 billion people watched matches in the 2014 tournament, and the biggest companies in the world are FIFA sponsors. Qatar has direct responsibility for its actions that run contrary to international law, such as the funding of terrorism and violation of human rights. FIFA has a responsibility, along with its sponsors, suppliers, and those companies building World Cup stadiums, to ensure actions contrary to global norms are no longer acceptable. We're placing Qatar, FIFA, and FIFA sponsors under a microscopic lens today and demanding that FIFA considers a rebidding process for a new host, because engaging with Qatar will set an example for the rest of the world that such practices as terrorism, human rights failings, and corruption are not serious issues. In addition, we demand that Qatar adheres to global norms on terrorism and human rights and takes some action. Qatar's involvement in corruption, terrorist financing, and human rights violations is all well known. This is information all well documented. And Qatar is responsible under international law and within international relations for upholding peace and security, and Qatar needs to take some action. We recognize that FIFA is not a state and does not have the same level of international legal responsibility as Qatar. However, FIFA does need to act in a manner that supports global trends in support of peace and security and upholding human rights standards. FIFA's moral, corporate, and legal responsibility arose during distinctive times, when it allowed Qatar to participate in the bidding contest of the World Cup 2022, and subsequently when it selected Qatar as the host for the World Cup. When it failed and is still failing to take responsibility for the present fate of migrant workers by not demanding Qatar reform its labor policies, and its failure to adhere to the UN guiding principles in its corporate responsibility to protect human rights. The UN guiding principles endorsed by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights are a global standard of practice expected of all states and businesses with regards to the relationship between business and human rights. Principle 12 states, all enterprises have the responsibility to respect all internationally recognized human rights. The UN guiding principles set out the protect, respect, and remedy framework, which includes corporate responsibility to respecting these rights. These are also meant to promote good practice. Is FIFA promoting good practice and adherence to human rights by continuing to take no action against Qatar? Pursuant to Article 3, FIFA statutes state that FIFA is committed to respecting all internationally recognized human rights and shall strive to promote the protection of these rights. In addition, Article 24 of FIFA's Code of Ethics states that persons bound by this code shall respect the integrity of others involved. They shall ensure that the personal rights of every individual whom they contact and who is affected by their actions is protected, respected, and safeguarded. This means that both Qatar and FIFA are facing obligations to ensure respect for the protection of migrant workers in conjunction with core labor standards. The Supreme Committee of FIFA, responsible for the World Cup, has introduced minimum standards for its contractors, and there has been some progress more widely on the living standards for some workers. However, human rights groups, trade unions, and business groups claim too little progress has actually been made. Moreover, as per UN Guiding Principle 13, FIFA can effect change in the wrongful practices of Qatar that is directly contributing to adverse human rights impacts. FIFA should prevent or mitigate these human rights impacts that are directly linked to their operations, even if they have not contributed to these impacts themselves. This is not happening. Corporate responsibility to respect human rights is not optional. This hampers on FIFA's reputation, and yet they still fail to take any action. Although FIFA is not responsible for the human rights violations itself, under UN Guiding Principle 19, FIFA does bear the responsibility to use its leverage to pressure Qatar to mitigate these issues. FIFA has leverage that gives it the power to influence. FIFA and the World Cup sponsors also have responsibilities to speak out and remedy state behavior that is contrary to peace and security. The Arab Federation points to FIFA's non-legal complicity as it has failed to act or speak out in the face of abuses related to its own operations through the construction of World Cup stadiums and activities in Qatar, which are leading to adverse human rights impacts. Furthermore, Qatar's support for extremism and terrorism comes in the form of direct government support through funding and provision of material, allowing known terrorist funders to freely operate in Qatar, providing a permissive jurisdiction for supporters and funders of designated terrorist organizations, and giving extremist views public voice through media and public events in Qatar. This is the greatest threat to human security today. Research reports have concluded it is impossible to identify action taken by Qatar to jail, charge, or put on trial any individuals designated as terrorists by the UN, and no instance of Qatar requesting mutual legal cooperation to deal with individuals designated as terrorists. The US Department of Treasury exposed its involvement of the ruling Al Thani family in Qatar in financing and supporting extremist organizations with a total funding of approximately $64 billion from 2010 to 2015. Such behavior cannot be tolerated, and Qatar has a responsibility to act. Qatar is serving as a source of further regional and international instability, which needs to be controlled by the international community by enforcing measures that would make Qatar abstain from continuing sponsorship to terrorism. FIFA can help play a significant role in assisting with tackling this critical problem by placing pressure on Qatar to commit to human rights practices and peace and security in accordance with their business partnership. Terrorism and terrorist financing is a direct contradiction to the preservation of human rights, and one that is in breach of FIFA's own human rights policy and code of ethics. By allowing Qatar to remain the host country, it reflects poorly on FIFA and may be perceived as an overall acceptance to Qatar's support for terrorism and extremism. Moreover, how can FIFA continue to support a country that is violating international law through the funding of terrorism? Through continued association and partnership, FIFA is jeopardizing its own reputation. Qatar's support of terrorism should be a reason in itself to prevent them from hosting the World Cup. Members from the football federations have voiced concerns and recognized the risks with Qatar. The president of the German Football Association voiced his concern and suggested that tournaments such as the World Cup should not be taking place in terrorist-sponsored countries. This was also backed up by Belgium and France, who criticized the FIFA organizing committee and begged them to withdraw. Additionally, the deeply problematic working conditions of migrant workers means that realizing Qatar's World Cup vision depends on their abuse and exploitation unless adequate measures are taken to address the human rights violations that are evident in the construction industry. All of these endanger migrant workers to the risk of forced labor, and reports have shown that these are situations akin to slavery. Statistics confirmed by a report from The Guardian found that 1,200 workers had died while working on Qatar's World Cup sites. Additional statistics from the Nepalese embassy in Qatar showed that migrant workers building infrastructure to host the World Cup had died at a rate of 1 every 2 days in 2014. What is more alarming is the International Trade Union Conference estimated that 7,000 more workers may die before the start of the tournament in 2022. This is approximately 100 deaths per match of the World Cup in the 2022 that will be televised around the world. Are we prepared to watch or attend the World Cup matches knowing how many people have died? And are FIFA sponsors ready to have their name attached to this kind of level of human suffering? As another example of human rights violations and inaction, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, in its 19th session, noted that Qatar's government had not reported any clear efforts to investigate, prosecute, or punish trafficking offenses made during this reporting period, leading to gaps in fully addressing human trafficking. These key components raise concerns about Qatar's credibility and commitment to respecting the rights and dignity of workers, particularly those involved in the construction and infrastructural projects of the FIFA 2022 World Cup. FIFA is also directly complicit in these violations and has a role to play to compel Qatar to change. On top of these issues, Qatar's position remains unchanged, as does FIFA, regarding corruption claims that arose during the bidding process. Former United States Attorney Michael Garcia released an investigative report on the bidding process that revealed how Qatar was the least prepared country to host such a World Cup event, compared to US and Australia, but was awarded the bid to host the tournament regardless. Garcia's report also revealed bribes and payments by Qatari officials made to FIFA executives in appreciation of their support in winning the bid. Although FIFA cannot be indicted for these claims, insight into corruption scandals lead one to conclude that further investigation is needed to identify the bidding process of Qatar. In relation to my mentioned points, the greatest concern is the complete lack of action or response from Qatar in changing its behavior. Qatar claims it is not involved in the funding of terrorism or that labor rights are protected. But we have continual reports and evidence that this is not the case. The largest issue on responsibility is how Qatar seems to refuse to listen and is not working to change its behavior, which runs contrary to international norms. The Qatari government has promised to improve conditions of migrant workers, but reforms to the labor policies and regulations have so far failed to make any difference. Many international and regional actors are calling for FIFA to pull the World Cup out of Qatar's hands. Qatar has refused to take any action in line with global standards on ending support for terrorism and extremism. What image is FIFA portraying by allowing the World Cup, a tournament that promotes values of community and peace building through football, to take place in Qatar, where preparations for this event are clearly stripping individuals for their rights and certainly not promoting peace and protection? Qatar, by sponsoring and financing terrorism, is in direct contradiction to the purpose and values of the World Cup Games. And the issue of corruption is something both Qatar and FIFA have to answer to. The Arab Federation is aware that the legal action against FIFA and its sponsors or Qatar is limited due to the system of international law. At the same time, we have the power to continue to pressure FIFA, its sponsors, and Qatar to take action in order to reverse the world of shame that Qatar has created. As I end this, I'd just like to stress that everyone in this room, has the responsibility to keep this discussion going, to shed light on these violations and to take them seriously. Otherwise, we will all be complicit in the act that's to come with the World Cup. Thank you.